President Barack Obama unveiled his 10-year budget blueprint on Wednesday. The president's plan would raise taxes on smokers, energy companies, and most people who pay income taxes. President Obama's budget would also make major cuts in government aid to farmers and reduce annual increases in Social Security checks. Here with more on Obama's fiscal outline is Washington Bureau Chief for the Oklahoman, Chris Castile. Chris, good morning.
Good morning, Dave.
Thanks for joining us. Hey, what kind of impact would this proposal have on the sequestration cuts that took effect last month?
Right, that $1.2 trillion in cuts spread out over 10 years. That's been the subject of a lot of stories because of the furloughs involved. The president's budget would essentially replace the way those cuts are done. The Pentagon is supposed to get like $500 billion in cuts over the next 10 years from that sequestration, from that budget act. And under the president's budget, the Pentagon would still take a pretty big hit, $150 billion over 10 years, but not the $500 billion. And throughout the budget, the way those cuts are imposed, are just replaced. And overall, the president says he has more deficit reduction in his budget than is actually in the sequestration, about $1.8 trillion. But a lot of that deficit reduction comes from raising revenue. So even though the sequestration would be placed, there would still be cuts. The agencies would have a lot more flexibility in how to do that. It'd be more gradual. Probably wouldn't see the furloughs involved that we're going to likely see in the next few months. But you'd still have the same level, but more in total deficit reduction.
Chris, we've seen proposals created by Congress. How does the president's plan differ from those?
Well, yeah, two different proposals. One the House budget, the Republican budget. It's far different from that, in that it does raise a lot of revenue, income tax hikes on the wealthy, and then the thing that you mentioned regarding the reduction in the inflation is really what it is. I mean, they use a different measure of inflation throughout this budget. That takes into account the way consumers react to inflation. So it's a more modest inflation measure that would mean smaller increases in like Social Security, cost of living allowances, and pensions, veterans' retirement, that kind of thing. And so that would also have an impact on income taxes, because income tax brackets, personal exemptions, standard deductions are adjusted every year for that inflation. So you wouldn't be, you'd have a lot more of your taxes subject, a lot more of your income subject to taxes. I know I've gone off on a tangent here, but that's a big difference in the budgets that have been proposed, and it's a big difference in, there's going to be a lot of fighting back and forth. And the Republicans are more inclined to support that than Democrats. Democrats think it's basically a way to hurt the seniors and elderly. So there's a lot of differences among the three different budgets, Senate Democrat budget, House Republican budget, and the president's budget, that it's going to have to be negotiated over the next few months.
Chris Castile, our Washington Bureau Chief, joining us via Skype this morning. And we're talking about President Barack Obama. He's unveiled his 10-year budget blueprint. And Chris, some of the cuts proposed in that budget could greatly impact Oklahoma, namely agriculture and oil and gas. What was the response from Oklahoma's congressional members?
Well, mostly negative. They're all Republican. So their responses were generally negative. Even without getting into the way the cuts affect agriculture and oil and gas, the Obama administration, since the president came into office, 5 years ago, he has proposed getting rid of all the deductions that oil and gas companies have been able to take for decades on their taxes, many of them similar to what other companies can deduct. It's never flown. It's not going to. They're not going to be passed in a vacuum. If there's a corporate tax overhaul, they'll look at all the pieces, but they're not going to just go after the oil and gas industry. Agriculture is going to be cut. There's no question about that. In a variety of ways, farmers are just not going to receive the kind of aid they have in the past. They're doing quite well on their own right now, and that's the feeling up here, really among both parties. But some of the Oklahoma members were encouraged by some of the things that the president included in his budget. Their main gripe is that the president's budget does not come to balance in 10 years, whereas the House Republican one does. And that's, as much as taxes or anything else, that's a major philosophical difference up here right now. Whether you and still kind of a shaky economy, you move to such austerity that you risk, jobs. And, the Republicans think, you cut federal spending until the budget is balanced. The president and Democrats say you shouldn't cut spending that fast while the economy's still trying to grow, because it'll just stunt that growth. So that's a major difference, really, is that the president never achieves balance in his budget. He still has $400 billion, $500 billion deficits each year.
Good analysis, as always, from the Oklahoman's Chris Castile. And Chris, we saw those unemployment numbers released today, and of course that's a figure we keep track of regularly. Hey, thanks so much for your time. I know you're monitoring some other votes out there. We'll let you get back to work, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.
All right, more coverage from Chris Castile can be found every day in the Oklahoman and online at newsok.com.